My initial purpose or motivation to create NAMI was multi-purposed. First, I had framed NAMI around the context of my own trumpet performance, developing a tool that would augment extended trumpet techniques with electronic effects and through a form that accommodates my body. I had wanted to explore non-traditional hand gestures outside of what was typically used for trumpet players in their left hand. The left hand is typically the hand controlling mutes, which was challenging for me as a short-armed person, and so I wondered if I could transform this perceived disadvantage into a meaningful experience. But before I get to how things would work together, I had to answer some more basic questions. As you can see, during this stage it was a rough prototype, and I was exploring basic things like, how can I use this or move in this? How does this feel? What sensors should I choose? Where does it make sense to place them? Is the glove the right form for what I want to achieve? Etc. What also helped was referencing other existing interfaces and products which could serve as sources of inspiration, like the short list below. But as I went through the poieto process, I later realized that this wasn't necessarily the purpose I truly wanted to pursue. Rather, a larger question developed. How can I make an instrument relevant, useful, or meaningful to a community I'm a part of, or other communities, and thereby giving it a chance at a longer life? During the concept phase, the designer begins to pick apart some of those macro parts and creates Blueprint Part 2 by determining training data, the machine learning model, and the material or form. Some questions to address in this phase include: 1. Who created the data? 2. How will you implement this data? Are you using existing software? If so, which? 3. What kind of interactions do various algorithms allow? 4. Do you know where your data came from? 5. How is the user represented in the algorithm you chose? 6. How does the form or material change based on its relationship to the algorithm? At this point, you're focusing on the relationship your input or data has with the rules or algorithm that it interacts with. You may not have a concrete answer to all of these questions, but the goal is to explore the possibilities and to learn about the relationship between your machine learning algorithm and the data or form. At this point, I realized one way in which NAMI could go beyond myself was to make it accessible for other communities. And I decided to focus on a community I was a part of, the Little Tokyo Nikkei community based in downtown Los Angeles. This community is very special to me because I identify as Nikkei, and I also was interested in exploring the Nikkei musical culture, which had largely not been documented. I'll go into more detail about the Nikkei lens or perspective in our next phase. So I realized when other community members use NAMI, they exposed me to alternative gestures, and by making changes to my design to accommodate these movements, NAMI became much more translatable. So for this example, I'm going to use one of the iterations I created of NAMI, and this one was used for the Performance Festival of Shadows in downtown Los Angeles, Little Tokyo, with Little Tokyo community members. So as a result of working with them, I changed some of my design and focused on sensors that would privilege and algorithms that would privilege subtle and slow movements. And as a result, here is one of the iterations. It is outfitted with multiple flux sensors on the fingertips, and they're tucked into these pouches. And on the other side, there's some FSRs on the back side, and then also a Hall effect sensor and a couple other sensors. So for this example, I'm going to be using a linear regression algorithm, and I'll walk you through how to train it. So also one thing to note is that I'm using Arduino and going into processing and then now into Wekinator, which is a machine learning program created by Rebecca Febrink. I also highly recommend going to Wekinator's website to check it out if you're interested in using machine learning with artistic projects, but also you can use it for other projects. That it's really great for gesture recognition and projects of that sort. So for this example, I have 3 different sound clips added into this project, and they are each controlling different effects. So for this one, let's train it. So I'm going to start recording. Actually, I'll delete this recording, and let's see. Okay, let's record this. I kind of like this sound, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that as this open palm gesture, and I'll start recording. Move around a little bit, but keep it generally an open palm. Okay, great. All right, so next I'm going to add in another sound clip. I like this sound too. But this time around, I'm going to have a closed fist gesture. And I'm going to start recording that. Stop recording. All right. All right. This is another one that I want to use. I think I'll do this gesture, and I'll use one of my FSRs. Great. All right, let's train this now. Okay, and we'll run it. As you can see in that example, there is a good amount of accuracy but also some error, which is a result of a couple issues, and can be worked out with some more training, changing the input-output connection editor, etc. One of the main reasons why I chose to focus on subtle and sometimes slow finger movements was because somatic movement and philosophy played a huge part in the Festival of Shadows performance. In fact, we would do somatic movement exercises before every rehearsal, and it was also a part of the performance itself. Which brings me to the next very important phase, focusing on cultural lenses. The next step is the critical thinking phase, in which the designer determines a cultural blueprint by refining the purpose, intentions, and material or form by looking at these aspects through various cultural lenses. 1. What sort of ideologies demanded its creation? 2. Who does this benefit or privilege? Is it inclusive or exclusive? Does it require a specific skill set? Does it require specific technology? Is it accessible to its end user? 3. What will it be used for during this time? 4. Does the form have cultural relevance to its users? 5. For me, I had also asked myself, what cultural body is it exploring or extending? 6. What biases do you or your collaborators have that affect this project? How so? 7. Did you check for confirmation bias? Info that favors you? This is the step where you can apply different social and cultural spins or lenses on various components. Have fun with it, don't be hung up on technicalities, feasibility, or specifics. Here are some examples of critical thinking lenses I played around with for NAMI. For this phase, NAMI was originally framed for myself as a trumpet player, but in this phase I realized my own cultural body as a Nikkei musician would be much more fruitful and compelling to explore, and this could lead to more collaboration with people outside of the trumpet or music spaces. To clarify, a cultural body is a body subject, which experiences as opposed to a body object, which is the physical entity. A cultural body is a body subject that speaks of and to a cultural practice and history. Dance researcher Professor Helen Thomas calls it marked by culture. So we're talking about embodiment, and we see examples of this from small things we don't think about much, such as cultural etiquette and everyday movements to what we traditionally consider creative expressions, like dance movements. The next phase is the reflection phase, which is when you scaffold and determine if you would change any input, functionality, material, or form based on everything up till this point. Some questions to consider are the following. 1. Why did you choose this input? 2. Which algorithm did you choose and why? 3. Does your form or material align with your purpose and functionality? 4. How would you want to experience this whole system? For example, is a glove the best way to experience and learn gestural language? 5. How or does it compromise your existing practice? For example, as a trumpet player, does this compromise the way I already interact with the instrument? Will I need to develop new skills? At this point, you might begin to see how long it will take, what technical things you'll need to figure out to implement this, or what component you want to focus on. I ended up focusing on a variety of forms to design gloves for specific communities. Here are some images of the various iterations I created, each created to fit their needs, like a smaller hand, or more conducive to certain gestures. The final phase is the implementation phase, in which the blueprints the designer has created are acted upon through the marriage between input, software, model, and final materials and forms. By no means does it mean that the instrument, tool, or product is complete at this point, but rather, one iteration has been created and the designer is encouraged to go back to preceding steps and iterate further after testing it out. Some questions to think about are the following. 1. What steps will you need to take to obtain your input? 2. What steps or questions will you need to address for functionality? 3. What steps will you need to create your final form or material? 4. Where does it live? Are you contributing this data or project to a larger library of projects? 5. What are the social and cultural implications of bringing this into the world right now? 6. Are there things that could go wrong? 7. Where will it end up once you finish with it? And for me, it helped to introduce it to other people I trusted to provide me with some feedback. Out of those conversations, I thought of another set of questions that would drive future iterations. Like, 1. How does this transfer to other musical instruments? 2. How does changing the training process change across a different culture or instrument? 3. During training, do various vocabulary sets conflict with any, technically or culturally? As you can tell, you realize there are more questions that come up, and it's okay not to be done with anything because this is exploratory.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to have you introduce poieto. I think one of the most important questions is, really looking at how poieto has informed your personal practice, be it through making and performance or even kind of your long-term organization and planning and projects.
So poieto has helped expand my toolkit and to look beyond just a sort of prescriptive approach to composition or to performance. And a lot of times when we practice as musicians, it might be for consistency, for example, to make sure that we are providing a consistent technical proficiency like every single day. But when you're creating music, there isn't necessarily a formula for how to create music. And I think one of the great things about poieto is that it's emphasizing exploratory approaches rather than it being prescriptive. And through that, I've realized that there's a larger toolkit and sonic possibilities as well as ways of thinking that comes along with poieto and as well as to composition.
Poieto creates a space for individuals to trace ideas, inspiration, and contribution. With NAMI, are there specific individuals, ideas, concepts, organizations that you feel should be part of the attribution process?
Of course, I think that's so important, and I'm so glad that you asked that question because crediting is so important, and NAMI was not possible without the community members and guidance that I received while I was at CalArts. For example, I took an interface design class by Ajay Kapoor, as well as your class, AI, Culture, and Creativity, as well as studied under several other instructors, Sarah Reed, Tim Feeney, Matt Barbier, were all sounding boards for me, and most importantly, the peers and community that I had at CalArts giving me constant feedback every single class that we went to. But also beyond that, when I left CalArts, I did a lot of my development of NAMI with communities like the Little Tokyo community in downtown Los Angeles. And that's a very different community because the people that I was working with weren't necessarily in the tech space or understood those tech terminology. That just wasn't the way that they communicated. And it's so, the way that they communicated, is still so valuable. And those contributions helped me design another set of another glove interface based on the original NAMI design specifically for that community. And without their contributions, that wouldn't have happened. So one of the most interesting experiences I had was when I was working with community members in downtown Los Angeles, specifically with the Nikkei community, for a project called Festival of Shadows, in which choreographers Marina Fukushima as well as Isaac Emanuel invited me to be part of the sound design and creation portion of the performance. And part of this performance included these sort of walls on that were projecting shadows on the stage. And the performers were performing largely behind these screens. And the composition I created to accompany this performance was created based on the gestural relationship between their gestures as well as my gestures, and the sonic interplay between the two.